March 3, 1952, 2:47 p.m. Vincent "Vinny" Docs Calabrese made the biggest mistake of his life. He looked Albert Anastasia dead in the eye and said one word: no. The meeting took place in the back office of the Longshoremen's Association headquarters on South Street, Lower Manhattan. The room smelled like cigar smoke and salt water. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Through the window, you could see Pier 45 stretching into the East River, where cargo ships from Europe unloaded everything from coffee to machinery. Anastasia wasn't alone. He had his underboss, Carlo Gambino, standing behind him, silent as a stone. And next to Anastasia sat Anthony, Tough Tony Anastasio, Albert's younger brother and the real power behind the Brooklyn waterfront. Between the three of them, they controlled every dock from Red Hook to the Battery. "Let me make sure I understand you," Anastasia said, his voice calm, almost friendly. "You're telling me you won't pay?" Vinny Calabrese had been working the docks for 28 years. He'd started as a longshoreman in 1924, loading banana boats for United Fruit Company. By 1945, he'd worked his way up to hiring boss at Pier 45, controlling which men got work each morning. The shape-up, they called it. Every morning at 6 a.m., 200 men would crowd the pier entrance and Vinny would pick 50. Those 50 men worked. The other 150 went home hungry. It was a good racket. The shipping companies paid Vinny $500 a week to keep the dock running smooth. The longshoremen paid him $5 a week each just for the chance to work. That was another $250. Then there were the kickbacks from trucking companies, the stolen cargo he fenced through contacts in New Jersey, the loan sharking operation he ran out of the pier office. All told, Vinny Calabrese was clearing $2,000 a week. In 1952, that was serious money. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Tough Tony Anastasio had sent word through the union. Every hiring boss on the Manhattan waterfront now paid 20% to the Anastasia family. That was the E. New tax. Non-negotiable. 20% of $2,000 was $400 a week, $2,800 a year. Vinny did the math in his head and didn't like the answer. "I built Pier 45 myself," Vinny said, leaning forward. "I've been running that dock since 1945, 7 years. I survived the Wildcat strikes. I survived the shipping slowdown after the war. I kept those ships moving when half the docks in New York were shut down. And now you want 20% of what I earned?" Anastasia's expression didn't change. "It's not about what you earned, Vinny. It's about what we let you keep earning." "I already pay the union," Vinny continued. "I pay Tough Tony's people $50 a week for labor peace. I pay the cops $100 a month to look the other way. I pay my dues. What more do you want?" Carlo Gambino spoke for the first time. "We want 20%, like everyone else." "Everyone else?" Vinny's voice rose. "I know for a fact that Mickey Bowers at Pier 32 doesn't pay you nothing. Neither does Tommy Rich at Pier 51, Anastasia smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Mickey Bowers and Tommy Rich are my nephew and my cousin. Family doesn't pay. You're not family, Vinny." That's when Vinny made his mistake. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe he genuinely believed his 28 years on the waterfront gave him protection. Whatever the reason, he stood up from his chair and said, "Then I guess I'm not paying. You want Pier 45? You're going to have to take it." The room went silent. Even the sounds from the street below seemed to fade away. Tough Tony stopped chewing his cigar. Gambino's eyes narrowed. And Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner of Murder, Inc., the man who'd personally killed at least 50 people, maybe 100, just nodded slowly. "Okay, Vinny," Anastasia said quietly. "Okay." Vinny walked out of that office thinking he'd won. He'd stood up to the mob. He'd drawn a line. As he crossed South Street and headed back toward Pier 45, he actually felt good about himself. What Vinny Calabrese didn't know, what he couldn't have known. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Was that Albert Anastasia had already made a decision before Vinny even said the word no. Because men like Anastasia didn't ask permission, they gave orders. And when someone refused those orders, the response wasn't negotiation, it was demonstration. By sunset that night, Vinny Calabrese would understand what it meant to refuse Albert Anastasia. and every other dock boss in New York would learn the lesson alongside him. March 3rd, 1952, 7:15 p.m. 4 hours after Vinny walked out of that meeting, the machinery was already in motion. Albert Anastasia didn't believe in half measures. When he sent a message, everyone heard it, and the message he wanted to send about Pier 45 needed to be visible from Brooklyn. The man Anastasia called was named Joseph Joe Shock Bonanno, not related to the Bonanno crime family, just an unfortunate coincidence of names. Joe Shock was 34 years old, a World War II Navy veteran who'd learned demolitions in the Pacific Theater. After the war, he'd come back to Brooklyn and discovered his military skills were very marketable in certain circles. Joe Shock specialized in fires, not murder, not robbery, just fires. Clean, professional, insurance-friendly fires that looked accidental, but burned exactly what they were supposed to burn. In 6 years, he'd torched 23 buildings, 4 warehouses, and 7 vehicles. The cops had never even questioned him. The call came through Tough Tony Anastasia, who Joe Shock had worked for before. The job was simple. Pier 45, complete destruction, make it look like an electrical fire. Timeline, tonight, payment, $5,000 cash. Joe Shock drove to Pier 45 at 8:30 p.m. in a stolen 1948 Ford pickup. He parked 3 blocks away on Water Street and walked to the pier carrying a canvas duffel bag that looked like it could belong to any longshoreman heading to work. Pier 45 was quiet at night. The ships had been unloaded. The longshoremen had gone home. The only person who should have been there was the night watchman, an old drunk named Eddie Morelli, who Vinny paid $30 a week to sleep in the pier office and occasionally check the locks. But Eddie Morelli wasn't there, because at 7 p.m., 2 men had knocked on his apartment door in Little Italy and given him $200 and a very clear instruction. Don't go to work tonight, don't ask questions, and don't remember who gave you this money. Eddie, who wasn't stupid despite the drinking, had taken the cash and stayed home. So when Joe Shock climbed the fence at the south end of Pier 45, nobody saw him. He moved through the darkness like he'd done it 100 times before, which he had. The pier was a maze of cargo containers, forklifts, wooden crates stacked 15 feet high, and massive coils of rope that dock workers used to secure ships. Joe Shock's duffel bag contained 6 devices he'd built himself. They looked like alarm clocks attached to mason jars filled with gasoline and white phosphorus. White. Phosphorus was beautiful stuff, military grade, impossible to extinguish once it started burning. It would eat through wood, metal, rope, even concrete if you gave it enough time. He placed the first device in the pier office, hidden behind a filing cabinet, set to detonate at 11 p.m. The second device went into the cargo hold of the main warehouse, tucked between pallets of raw rubber from Brazil. Vinny had been storing that rubber for a trucking company out of Newark, planning to fence it later. 11:05 p.m. The third and fourth devices were positioned at opposite ends of the pier's wooden structure itself, where the support beams met the decking. 11:10 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. The fifth went into the electrical room, where the pier's generator and main power lines were housed. That's where investigators would find the cause of the fire. 11:20 p.m., the sixth device Joe Shock kept in reserve. He always brought a spare. By 9:45 p.m., Joe Shock was back in his truck heading toward Brooklyn. The devices were ticking. In 75 minutes, Pier 45 would cease to exist. Meanwhile, Vinny Calabrese was having dinner at Forlini's restaurant on Baxter Street with his wife and his brother-in-law. He was drinking red wine, eating veal parmigiana, and telling the story of how he'd stood up to Albert Anastasia that afternoon. His brother-in-law, who knew better, went pale and excused himself to use the bathroom. Vinny thought he was being impressive. He didn't notice that his wife had stopped eating and was staring at him with something close to horror. At 10:30 p.m., Vinny got a phone call at the restaurant. It was his nephew, Paulie, who lived 2 blocks from Pier 45. "Uncle Vinny, something's going on at the pier. I saw trucks leaving and there's nobody at the gate. You want me to check it out?" "Nah," Vinny said, too much wine in him now. "Eddie's there. It's fine. I'll check it tomorrow morning." "You sure? It just feels weird." "Paulie, relax. Everything's fine." At 11:00 p.m., the first device detonated. The pier office exploded in a ball of white-hot flame that blew out every window and sent burning papers spiraling into the night sky. 5 minutes later, the warehouse went up, the rubber catching fire so fast that flames shot 40 feet in the air. The wooden pier structure followed, both ends simultaneously erupting as the support beams turned into torches. By 11:20 p.m., when the electrical room exploded, Pier 45 was a wall of flame visible from New Jersey. March 3, 1952, 11:37 p.m. Vinnie Calabrese arrived at Pier 45 to find 200 people standing in the street watching his life's work burn to the waterline. 6 fire engines from FDNY were pumping water into the flames, but it was useless. The pier was already gone. The office was a crater. The warehouse had collapsed into itself. The wooden structure that extended into the East River was burning so hot that the water around it was literally boiling, sending up clouds of steam that mixed with the smoke to create a fog that covered 3 city blocks. Vinnie's nephew Paulie was there, along with a dozen longshoremen who lived in the neighborhood. They all had the same experience. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Expression, shock mixed with understanding. They knew what this was, they knew who'd done it, and they knew why. A fire department captain named Michael Riley was coordinating the response. He'd been fighting fires in Lower Manhattan for 18 years, and he'd seen his share of suspicious blazes. This one, though, this was professional work. "Any idea how it started?" Vinnie asked, his voice hollow. Captain Riley looked at him for a long moment. "Electrical fire, probably. Started in multiple locations simultaneously, which is unusual. We'll investigate. But between you and me, Mr. Calabrese, this wasn't an accident." "No," Vinnie said quietly. "It wasn't." The financial damage was catastrophic. The pier itself was worth $75,000, the warehouse and equipment inside another $50,000, the cargo that had been stored there, belonging to various shipping companies, $200,000. Total loss, $325,000, and that didn't include the lost future earnings from the dock being shut down for months, maybe years. But the real damage wasn't financial, it was reputational. By sunrise, every dock boss, every union official, every trucking company operator, and every longshoreman in New York knew what had happened. Vinnie Calabrese had refused to pay Albert Anastasia. Albert Anastasia had burned his pier to the ground. The equation was simple, the lesson clear. March 4, 1952, 8:30 a.m. Vinnie received a visitor at his home in the Lower East Side. It was Carlo Gambino, alone this time. No muscle, no theatrics. He sat at Vinnie's kitchen table and accepted a cup of coffee that Vinnie's wife made with shaking hands. "Albert wanted me to check on you," Gambino said. "Make sure you understood." "I understand," Vinnie said. "Do you?" "Because it's important that you really understand, Vinnie. This wasn't personal. Albert doesn't hate you. You're not his enemy. You're just someone who needed to learn a lesson, and in the process, you helped Albert teach 50 other people the same lesson." Vinnie said nothing. What was there to say? "Here's what happens now," Gambino continued. "You're going to rebuild Pier 45. It'll take 6 months, maybe a year. During that time, you're going to work at Pier 32 under Mickey Bowers. He'll give you a job as an assistant hiring boss, keep you earning. When Pier 45 is rebuilt, you can go back. Albert will even help with the insurance claim. Make sure you get paid out." "And the 20%? Vinnie asked. "You pay 25% now," Gambino said. "The extra 5% is for the education." Vinnie nodded. There was no point in arguing. "One more thing," Gambino said, standing up. "You probably lost about $2,000 in cash that was in the pier office when it burned, right? Your weekly take that you hadn't deposited yet?" Vinnie had actually lost $2,400, but he nodded. Gambino. "And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell." Reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the kitchen table. "Albert wanted you to have this. Call it a loan, no interest. You can pay it back when Pier 45 is running again." After Gambino left, Vinnie opened the envelope. Inside was $2,500 in cash, more than he'd lost. Albert Anastasia had burned his pier to the ground and then given him money to recover from it. That's when Vinnie finally understood what he was dealing with. This wasn't about money. It was about control. Albert Anastasia didn't just want tribute. He wanted everyone to know that he could destroy you and save you, that your entire existence was at his discretion. March 5, 1952, 6 a.m. The morning shape-up at Pier 32 was different. Normally, 200 longshoremen showed up hoping for work. Today, there were 350. The extra 150 were the men who used to work at Pier 45. They had families to feed, rent to pay, debts to cover. They couldn't wait 6 months for the pier to be rebuilt, so they came to Pier 32 and Pier 38 and Pier 51, begging for work that didn't exist. Mickey Bowers, the hiring boss at Pier 32 and Albert Anastasia's nephew, stood on a wooden platform with a megaphone. "Listen up. We got positions for 60 men today. That's it. If I call your name, you work. If I don't, come back tomorrow." Vinnie Calabrese stood next to Mickey, watching his former workers crowd forward desperately. These were men he'd known for years. Tony Rizzo, who had 5 kids, Frank DeLuca, whose wife was pregnant, Pete Sorrento, who was saving money to bring his parents over from Sicily. Mickey called out 60 names. Tony Rizzo was called. Frank DeLuca wasn't. Pete Sorrento wasn't. The men who weren't called turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, another day without wages. This was Albert Anastasia's genius. He didn't just control the docks, he controlled the men who worked them. And by burning Pier 45, he'd created 150 desperate longshoremen who now depended on his family's good graces just to survive. It was a demonstration of power that rippled through every level of the waterfront economy. By the end of March 1952, every single hiring boss in Manhattan was paying the 20% tax. Not because they were afraid of fires, though they were, but because they'd seen what total destruction looked like and understood that cooperation was cheaper than resistance. The system Albert Anastasia built that spring would last for years. By 1953, the Anastasia family controlled 90% of the New York waterfront. They didn't own the docks, they owned something more valuable. They owned the fear. And fear, when properly managed, generated more money than any legitimate business ever could. The shipping companies paid protection money. The union officials paid tribute. The longshoremen paid for the privilege of working. And at every level, Albert Anastasia's organization took its cut. Conservative estimates put the waterfront racket at $40 million a year by 1955. Vinnie Calabrese rebuilt Pier 45. It took 11 months and cost him $90,000, most of it covered by insurance money that mysteriously got approved without the usual investigation. He went back to work in February 1953, and every Friday, like clockwork, he delivered 25% of his weekly take to a collector who worked for Tough Tony Anastasio. He did this for 5 years. He never complained. He never missed a payment. He never spoke about the night his pier burned down. When new hiring bosses asked him about Albert Anastasia, Vinnie would just shake his head and say, "Pay what you're asked. It's cheaper than the alternative." Albert Anastasia himself was murdered in 1957, shot to death in a barber chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. The killers were never caught, but everyone knew it was Carlo Gambino making his move. Gambino took over the family and renamed it after himself. The waterfront racket continued without interruption. Tough Tony Anastasio kept running the Brooklyn docks until he died of natural causes in 1963. The system outlived its creators. Vinnie Calabrese worked Pier 45 until 1968, when containerization and new shipping technology made the old piers obsolete. He retired at 62, moved to New Jersey, and never spoke publicly about what happened that night in 1952. But people remembered. The story became legend on the waterfront. New hiring bosses were told about Vinnie Calabrese and Pier 45 as a cautionary tale. The message was always the same. The system isn't negotiable. The waterfront was finally cleaned up in the 1970s after decades of federal investigations and RICO prosecutions. But for 20 years, from 1952 to 1972, the docks belonged to the mob. And it all started with one dock boss who said no, and one pier that went up in flames. The fire at Pier 45 burned for 6 hours that night in 1952. By morning, there was nothing left but charred wood and twisted metal. But the real fire, the one that burned through the entire waterfront economy, that fire lasted for 2 decades. Albert Anastasia didn't need to burn another pier. One was enough. One demonstration of absolute power was all it took to bring every dock boss in New York into line. Sometimes the most effective violence is the violence you only have to commit once. After that, the fear does the work for you.